Have you ever found yourself at home, you've got a pile of dishes in the sink, the carpet needs hoovering, and you've still got that flickering light in the corner that you haven't quite gotten around to changing the bulb for? You're binge watching America's Next Top Barista, and your mind floods with all of the productive things that you'd rather be spending your time doing right now, but you can't be bothered to do any of them. Turns out dopamine may have a large part to play in that apathetic feeling. Let me explain. Hello and welcome, and today whilst I waffle on you can watch me sketch an Inca drawing that I wanted to do for a while but just have not been able to find the motivation to get started on it, so it felt quite fitting for this video. So this subject is one that I've been thinking about recently and should hopefully help anybody who feels like they are struggling to be more productive or to commit time to developing a skill or hobby, and particularly artists who are forever in that battle with procrastination and struggle to get going in the studio after a long day in their day job. Let's start by talking about what dopamine is and the role it plays in the brain. Well, dopamine is a hormone produced by the brain that is often associated with signalling pleasure, but more accurately, it controls your levels of motivation. Dopamine plays a large part in how likely you are to act on an impulse. To use a sink full of dishes as an example, if your dopamine levels are high, you might see a few dishes that need washing up and you just do it without much thought. If your dopamine levels are low, however, you see a few dishes that need washing, you know they need washing, but you can't be bothered, so you don't. It's only when the sink is overflowing and you are running out of cutlery and mugs that the impetus is high enough for you to act on the impulse to wash the dishes. The other job dopamine has in the brain is to reward behaviours that lead to good things happening and to avoid behaviours that lead to bad things happening. Well, in theory that is what's supposed to happen, although in today's society it doesn't quite work like that, and I'll explain why in a bit. But we need to see exactly how it does this first. So let's look at one of our caveman ancestors. Let's call him Bert. Bert comes across a tree filled with a fruit that he's never seen before. They look edible, so he gives one a taste. If that fruit is tasty and sustaining, dopamine levels will increase in the brain. If it's bitter and not very palatable at all, then dopamine levels will decrease. The point is that the amount of dopamine released by a particular action is remembered by the brain, so if Bert comes across the same fruit later on, the same levels of dopamine are released in anticipation of what will happen if he eats it. So Bert is more likely to eat tasty, nutritious fruit and more likely to avoid unpalatable and probably dangerous fruit. An important point here is that the anticipation of reward causes a release of dopamine. This is why gambling can be so addictive, and addictions in general tend to be caused by a loop of anticipating a reward, which releases dopamine. That dopamine then makes it more likely that you will act on a particular impulse, and then acting on that impulse releases more dopamine, which your brain remembers for the next time, and repeat. The thing is, the effect of dopamine goes beyond our logic and reasoning. Have you ever looked in the fridge in the hope of finding some tasty treats that you had for some reason forgotten were there, only to find that it's empty, and then 5 minutes later you find yourself looking in the fridge again because you know maybe something has magically appeared there? But of course it hasn't. We know logically that the fridge will still be empty, but the dopamine released by the anticipation that there could be something there causes us to act on that impulse regardless of how illogical it is. There is one more important aspect of dopamine, or in fact any chemical in our body for that matter, that we need to understand before it all starts making sense. The more our body is exposed to it, the more tolerant it becomes to it. In the same way that somebody who regularly drinks alcohol will need to drink more to feel the same effects as somebody who drinks very rarely. Now let's bring this all into focus. In today's world we are constantly bombarded with technology that floods our brains with dopamine. Social media gives us a nice hit whenever you get a like or a comment, or your favourite influencer has posted their latest TikTok, and the anticipation of this keeps us checking our phones every few minutes because you know maybe something crucially vital for you to know has happened in the last 30 seconds since you last checked. Then there's TV, radio, computer games and even YouTube, all designed to give you that nice tasty hit of dopamine. The problem is that we have a constant and easy access to large quantities of dopamine. This in turn raises our base level of dopamine. You can kind of think of this as your dopamine level when averaged out across the day. whereas Bert the caveman gets moderate hits of dopamine at various points throughout the day. We get a constant feed of high dopamine levels all day long. This has two effects on us. Firstly, it means that as our tolerance to dopamine increases, it becomes less effective. So it becomes harder to get motivated to do anything, even the things that you know you're going to enjoy doing. Remember, dopamine works outside of any logic or reasoning. The second effect is that because your base level of dopamine is higher, when your dopamine levels do drop to lower levels, say when you're at work filing paperwork or doing boring chores, it feels so much worse, and the feeling of boredom and apathy can just become overwhelming. So how do we combat this? Well, a lot of people will suggest a dopamine detox. This is where you cut out as much dopamine as possible for one day periodically. Maybe a once a week, once a month, whatever. So you sit in a room, no forms of entertainment. I guess you still need to eat, but no cake or biscuits or, heaven forfend, even tea. And you get as bored as possible to bring down your dopamine base level. Now that all sounds a bit extreme for me, so I've simply made a point of being mindful to avoid frequent extended computer game sessions, for example, and to not check my phone as often, turn it off, put it on silent, put it out of reach in a different room. You could maybe even make a point to only check it when you're, say, at work eating your lunch. Then you are coinciding that hit of dopamine with the dopamine that is released when you are eating your tasty pasta salad. Remember, it's not necessarily about avoiding high dopamine activities altogether, it's about avoiding that constant feed of high dopamine activities that will raise your dopamine base level. But hopefully, simply by understanding a little bit about the mechanics of dopamine and the effects it has on us, you'll be able to recognise behaviours in your own life that are either caused by or are contributing to excessive levels of dopamine in your brain and raising that dopamine base level. So the next time you have a million things you want to do but you just can't be bothered to do any of them, maybe it's time to put that phone away, turn off the TV, go for a walk and just be alone with your own thoughts for a little while. Anyway, hopefully you found this video interesting and helpful, and please let me know if you did. And if you're still with me at this point, I would like to thank you. It really does mean a lot to me that there are people who find my waffling of interest. But for me, that's all I've got time for, so until next time, cheerio. Thanks for watching. If you'd like to support me and the channel, then leave a like, leave a comment, and consider subscribing if you haven't already. It really does help out a lot. Visit www.carriejacobsart.com where you can find my prints, my t-shirts and my Star Stuff art kits, all for sale, and of course you can follow me on Facebook and Instagram at Carrie Jacobs Art. Cheerio.